America should really start to have conversations about initiatives like that where we just treat people as humans. Harm reduction is a very basic principle that can be can seem very novel to individuals merely because of the fact that society has demonized drug use and stigmatized drug use in such a way that it's ingrained in a lot of us to think that people who use drugs are not deserving of support. And harm reduction really challenges that. And harm reduction treats individuals just as human beings, regardless of whether they're using, regardless of whether they're in recovery, but really looks at that person's entirety on a very holistic level, understands that person's challenges, and then works with that person to navigate those challenges.
It's important to understand what harm reduction is, because I think people are often confused by it. And harm reduction is simply a philosophy of meeting people and individuals where they are at, and not kind of imposing your own values or be somewhere where they're not ready to be. It's also a philosophy of respect for human life and for people to make decisions on their own. And so basically we're saying that someone who's using drugs is not a bad person, is not someone, that's weak, but someone that we would like to help.
Rockland Connects is a movement to improve the lives of people who use drugs in Rockland County. Our focus is around opioid and heroin use. Rockland Connects has come and built a movement to bring more non-judgmental services to people who are actively using drugs in Rockland County. And we do HIV prevention, hepatitis C prevention, and overdose prevention through a harm reduction approach.
The fact that people's lives are saved, I would say that harm reduction programs have saved more lives than I have as a physician, so I think it's made a bigger impact. You see people transform, people's lives are saved. I mentioned in my drug treatment programs, people, I've had patients who've used for 15 years and then they stop using, Having friends who've suffered through addiction, some of who've lost their lives, it just feels like the right thing to do, and feels like a way to kind of make a difference. It becomes a sense of mission and a sense of there's so much tragedy there. A million people have died of overdoses over that time period. New young people all over the country being infected with hepatitis C and died of overdose. So it becomes more of really like a war against this devastating illness, as well as some of the devastating policies that have been put into place that continue to cause harm, and so it becomes more of a sense of duty.
Around this time last year, I was a senior at Harvard University, traveling between Harvard Square and the South End of Boston. I was working at a community organization there that works with people who use drugs to bring them services, linkage to treatment. But I had this colleague and friend, his name was Greg, and he was a short guy with a round belly, and he had one of the most uplifting spirits. He was always dancing. in our center. We had a drop-in center. I remember one day working and I just started hearing someone crying, and with wide eyes I turned to our executive director and she was like, "Oh, that's just Matthew. Don't worry about it, he's always crying." And we all laughed because it was just like one of the reasons why we loved Matthew. That was part of his sensitivity, and he was such a kind guy with such a big heart. But he was saying like very poignant things, you know. He was saying, "Why doesn't people treat me with the same respect that I treat them?" You know, he said, I might be a drug addict, but I'm not a bad person. And my friend Greg and colleague sat with him, held his hand, hugged him, and as Matthew was crying and wiping his nose on Greg's hoodie, and we all laughed because it was such a cute, sweet moment. But Greg said to him, "All you need to do is love yourself this much, and we'll love you the rest of the way until you love yourself this much." And of course Matthew just started breaking down crying. You know, "Greg, you're my only friend. You're the only one who loves me. You're the only one who wants the best for me." And that was our job working at that organization, is making sure that people who use drugs felt loved in a society where they got daily reminders that they were unloved and that they were worth less. And I think people really undermine the power of that, of showing someone that they're significant and that their lives matter. And last year, at the end of last year, I got the news that Greg passed away of a heroin overdose. He was in recovery, and every time he came to work, he understood exactly what those people were going through, because that used to be him. And he dedicated so much of his time, so much of his energy, really fighting for those people who had shared that story that he had. And he was suddenly taken away from us, someone who was such a champion of this idea of unconditional regard, this idea of uplifting people's spirits. And it was, you know, devastating for me. It was devastating for me, and I committed myself to this work of working with people who use drugs, working with people who use heroin and opioids. And more so now because of Greg and because of his memory. I carry it with me every single day. I think about him all the time because he taught me so much. And the same love and the same regard that Greg brought to our drop-in center in Boston is what I hope I could bring, just even a fraction of that, to Rockland County. In last year we lost 40 lives to overdose deaths. Just imagine. I lost one life in my time, and it was destructive enough.
Then use a substance that stops that from happening, stops that withdrawal syndrome from taking place. So that's really, in the short term, what happens. But once you get sort of all of the opiates out of your system, then that withdrawal is gone. Now that's not to say that people still don't have cravings, because a lot of people have cravings, right? Like, so they either see something that triggers them, or, you know, or they're in a certain location, or a friend comes back, something like that. But you can think about the same thing. We do that for alcohol, for coffee, right? You crave coffee in the morning, right? It's the same kind of thing. So those things might exist for longer periods of time, And then often, again, with time, those sort of go away as well. But what we do know is that when medication is used to treat the addiction, any of the three medications that I mentioned, the naltrexone, the methadone, or the buprenorphine, we know that people have much better outcomes than if they don't use medication. There is years and years of data, hundreds and hundreds of studies that show that. And I do have to say that I think there's a lot of stigma in our society about using these medications. People talk about, oh, you're just going to substitute one drug for another, or you're just going to get addicted to this instead of that. And you know what? We don't talk about that when we talk about diabetes, about insulin, people requiring insulin for the rest of their life, you know? We don't talk about that when we talk about high blood pressure or heart disease or cholesterol, right? But we talk about that with addiction. Medically, they're not that different. They're all chronic illnesses that require us to manage those addictions. Most people need medications to manage them. Not everybody, right? But most people. But you know, you could say people, you know, if you lost 50 pounds, you might not need insulin for your diabetes. It's hard to lose 50 pounds, right? If you had a diet that had no fat, you might not need to take the medication for your cholesterol. It's hard to do that. It's the same thing. If you know, have all of these behavior changes in your life, you might not need the medication to manage the addiction. It's hard to do that. And so we know that medication works. And I think the medication for the chronic illness of addiction is just like the medication for the chronic illness of heart disease, diabetes, and high blood pressure.
In those suburban neighborhoods, there's a much less understanding about drug use and about the infectious complications of drug use, including hepatitis C and HIV. So there's a lot of education that needs to be done, and a lot of awareness. There's not even harm reduction programs. And realizing that you can't just treat the infection, but you need to treat the addiction, and so forth, in order to truly make a difference. So there's a lot of mistrust that people had for the healthcare system. People have kind of getting discriminated against, and that, you know, by being there over time, people could change. You know, that you can't just write off people and say, oh, they're not going to take their meds or they don't care. People do care, and it's really society giving up on them. And if you could show people that you know, are investing the time and the kind of intellectual work that it takes to bring people some health, people are grateful and they want to do better themselves. And you could see how that not only would change how the person saw themselves and obviously their health, but also their family, their kids, and their loved ones. And so you're not just treating the patient, but the family.
You didn't cause it, you can't control it, you can't cure it. You have to remember that you are a person too. You have to be able to take care of yourself so that you can take care of your loved one. And you never give up hope. Ever, 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 even when it gets really ugly and awful. And it can. And it can do it again and again. And you just don't give up. And I don't know how I ended up to be as blessed as I am to have the family that I do to help see us through all of this, but I don't have to visit my son in a cemetery. I got to spend Mother's Day with him, and that's an incredible blessing.
At some point, certainly when people start using drugs, they do get high. But then there's some point where it's all about, if you don't get your hands on it, you will go into opiate withdrawal, you feel terrible, and so it becomes this chase around not going into opiate withdrawal. And that's exhausting day after day, year after year, and it wears on people. And so people come in just saying, I can't do this anymore. Like, I'm getting old, or it's ruining my family, or like, I just can't do this, I need help. And so that's the kind of story that I hear.
Know now what can be done to prevent HIV, to prevent hepatitis C, to prevent people from dying of overdose. And the solution to that is harm reduction and support. The solution to that is really understanding the challenges that people face when they are living with addiction and working with them to navigate that. And so that means access to clean needles, that means access to Narcan and overdose training reversal, or that means education on how to use safely until they are ready to get into treatment. And no one can tell that person when they're ready, only they can. And so it's important to engage with people so that when they are ready, they know who to turn to.
I can't get inside your brain and you can't get inside my brain. And you don't ever stop loving them. You just always remember that this is what you're dealing with. It's a disease. So never give up, and don't be afraid to reach out to whomever.
It's how you react to your circumstances. I don't care what your mother's doing, what your father's doing, you're divorced, this, that. Whatever's around you is not going to dictate who you are, because you're much bigger than that. So I just want to share, man. You're the future. Don't let anybody get in your space. Don't let anybody tell you what to do. And you know that you have dreams. You know that you have visions. You see a target that no one else can see, and only you can hit it. And everybody has one sooner or later. If you don't have a dream, then get one, because it's something to live for.
A nasal atomizer, and this you would attach to the syringe so that it will spray out in a mist. So what we're going to do first is I'm going to open this up. Right here. Take this out. And first you're going to pop off all of the colors.
The overall goal is to really eliminate hepatitis C from the United States, from the world. There's a lot of work that we have to do that involves education, as well as increasing access to syringe exchange programs and decreasing stigma overall, so that people are more willing to seek care and not to feel judged or treated poorly when they interact with the healthcare system.
We want to bring more awareness to this epidemic. We want to bring more education. We complement our HIV and hepatitis C prevention and our overdose prevention with education on how to stay safe when you're using. And we are a community organization that is committed to improving the lives of people who use drugs, and particularly preventing the spread of HIV, the spread of hepatitis C, and preventing overdose deaths among this community. Harm reduction is a true embodiment and manifestation of hope.